Hey, this is your coffee, and we're talking about literature. This time it is the collected poems of William Butler Yeats. So this particular collection was compiled and published in 1939. Obviously, Yeats is a pillar Irish poet. His father was apparently a painter. He drew extensively in his poetry from Irish mythology and folklore. And he was briefly a senator of the Irish Free State. So side note, I grew up, Yeats is one of those poets that when you're a young, at least man, I don't know how women saw it, but a young man, you definitely run into Yeats. It's the second coming. For sure, you run into it at some point. And if you've ever seen The Sopranos all the way through, then you run into that. And so it has a special significance just because it sounds cool. I think that's a big part of it. But whatever the case, I'm sure there's a lot that I didn't get when I was reading it in undergrad and before undergrad, and a lot that I'm missing now, but I tried to go back through. I read all the poems that were there. I know the particular collection that I got, I think it was missing. It wasn't the complete collected poems because I did some research and tried to compare it, and there were a couple that I found that were outside of the collection that I read. But whatever the case, some basic analysis. His poetry reflected a pessimism and conservatism, much like Eliot and Pound in America. One commentator discussed that he rendered all of himself into the art. So there were a lot of very personal things, which, you see with a lot of poets. That's what makes a lot of their work esoteric, but can also be very deep and interesting for that reason as well. So he tried to represent emotion and lived experiences, and he was opposed to the age of science, progress, democracy, and modernization. WTF, Yeats. I'm not a big fan of that, obviously. I don't like anything that's going to go against science and progress, but there was a whole romanticism that came out when everybody was saying that science was going to be the answer to all of our problems, and then there's this romantic notion that we still had to have the more crude, primal aspects of human whatever to enjoy life or be human or whatever else. And there's some, I certainly understand that sentiment. We can't cut it all out, but by the same token, we're just pandering to our baser interests, the baser biological things that make us up, which is, it's a lot of the reason I like a lot of the artistic things that I do like. And what purpose would art serve if not to pander to kind of our baser instincts that we don't really understand? It doesn't serve a purpose of really advancing things in a meticulous, logical way or anything like that. So I wouldn't want to be rid of art, despite the fact that I kind of know that it's a bunch of BS, but still, here we are. We're talking about Yeats, and there is for our feeble brains, there's a kind of stimulation that you get from this kind of complexity, so I appreciate that. Criticism. In the Irish Times, Dennis Donahue, "Among School Children" was Yeats's finest poem. One quote, "This points to another instance of unanimity. It is universally agreed that Yeats became a great poet, not merely a post-Victorian lyricist, with the publication of Michael Robartes and The Dancer, The Tower, and The Winding Stair and other poems." So particular collection was apparently what thrust him into the upper echelons of poets. Quote, "In these books he achieved a poetry of which even Leavis, a critic not disposed to admire it, wrote, 'There is no element of a man's experience in the 20th century that of its nature it excludes.'" So it's comprehensive, apparently. It covers all of it. So one of the problem that Yeats was trying to address was how to reconcile the claims of common speech, morally responsible, with the insisted on autonomy of the poem, a reconciliation of image and discourse, meaning and form, a claim to unity inherent in the symbolism that modern English poetry inherited from the French, end quote. So that was the problem. That's what he's trying to do. And as I was reading that, it wasn't registering to my brain at all, so I can't really comment on whether he did that or not. What are my thoughts? My thoughts are, there's some jaggedness in some of the work. There's kind of a lack of music, and something I found in, obviously, like John Donne, there's a kind of music in it. It's fun to read. Keats and Eliot, there's, even when it's not distinctly musical, it's not like, I don't mean it's got a 4-bar setup and all that stuff. I just mean there's something lyrical to it that makes it easy to read and digest and is appreciated. In Yeats, there seems to be some jaggedness evenness when it comes to the number of syllables, the schemes, the setups, the kinds of words. Depending on the poem, obviously, but when I was going through it and I'm reading poem after poem after poem, it felt jagged in a way that, like, say, Emily Dickinson didn't feel jagged when I went through hers. And there was, as I was reading it, and I understand, there's a lot from Irish mythology and folklore and personal experience and that kind of stuff, but it did feel like a large chunk of it was too obscure. And obviously that could be my failing. If I knew more about Irish mythology and folklore and Yeats in general, then I'd probably get more out of it. But that degree of obscurity, I guess if you're somebody who studies this area, then you probably don't feel that. So this is a minor criticism, but just trying to dive into it, as part of this 100-book race to the number one, it was difficult to really get into too much of it. So I have some quotes, some are just pieces of quotes from poems that I ran into that I just like the phrasing. Quote, "The phantom beauty in a mist of tears," end quote. That just sounds lovely, and it's got the juxtaposition of beauty and sad things, or scary things like phantoms, or just being incorporeal, and a mist of tears juxtaposed to beauty. I like that. Another one, "Mingling hands and mingling glances till the moon has taken flight." And I probably picked all just lyrical chunks that I really enjoyed. Mingling hands and mingling glances. The sounds, I really like the sounds in that. Until the moon has taken flight. Idea of the moon taking flight. "The blind hound with mournful din lifts slow his wintry head. The servants..." Oh my god, I did it. No, those when I was in undergrad, I had a class where we were supposed to read poetry in front of everybody. And my voice, when I initially read, my voice would dipped. Like anybody who's reading for the first time, it dips at the end of a line and goes on the next one, go on the next one. And it's just a horrible way to read it. So I got excoriated in front of everybody and told to sit down that I couldn't read because I kept doing this. And I was just like, oh, this is so sad. But then later in the class, I raised my hand again when she asked if somebody wanted to read, and I did it properly this time. And she's like, that was brave. That was brave. So it's one of my great coups in life. So that's something that always stuck with me. And then I go back on it right now. "The blind hound with a mournful din lifts slow his wintry head. The servants bear the body in, the hounds wail for the dead." I probably just like the dog and hound imagery in that. "And thine own sadness where stars grow old and dancing silver sandaled on the sea, sing in their high and lonely melody." These sound pretty lyrical. I don't know, maybe I was just BSing earlier. "This body trembling like a windblown reed." That reminds me of, what is it called? Final Fantasy Tactics. What a nerdy reference. Oh, but who was it? I can't remember their names now. It's not Ramona. What is his name? The two friends, they were like sitting out somewhere before they parted ways. That has an excellent story, by the way. It's very literary. Before they parted ways and they're blowing through reeds, just making sound like they used to do when they were kids, right before they part. It's a great story. God, that has a good story. "No woman's loved me, no man sought my help." It's a sad state of affairs. "And God would bid his warfare cease, saying all things were well, and softly make a rosy peace, a peace of heaven with hell. Shots fired." And "From sailing to Byzantium." "That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh, or fowl, commend all summer long, whatever is begotten, born, and dies." Of course, the movie, That Is No Country for Old Men, which is based on the book, Cormac McCarthy, which I read and wasn't too keen on. I like Blood Meridian. No, not Blood Meridian. Yeah, Blood Meridian? What is it? What's it called? Yeah, Blood Meridian. I like that a lot more than No Country for Old Men. And a lot of Cormac McCarthy. I read The Road too, and I think just Blood Meridian is the work, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And I'll listen to Cormac McCarthy sometimes, but I think he doesn't quite reach that level, when it comes to really the greatest of the greats of the greats. I don't think he quite gets there, but that's from The Second Coming now. "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." And, see, that isn't supposed to be lyrical, that's the point. It's got jagged chunks because it's the apocalypse. Bad things are happening. So things fall apart. The center cannot hold it, chunks it, stops it. So you're like, mere Here anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. And I like he sets up the metaphor of being drowned by using words like loosed and tide and loosed and everywhere. All these things suggest and build up that idea that hits home drowned, you know. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. So this is just, it's good stuff. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shapeless lying body in the head of a man. A gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds. Just note, I called a paper that I wrote that I sent to the Templeton Foundation at one point that was arguing that Mill actually argued for, I forget what I called it, but a kind of democratic structure that was governed by scientific principles. I made some kind of argument about that, and I called it Spiritus Mundi. I sent it to the Templeton Foundation and lost horribly, on that one. But real shadows of the indignant desert birds, the darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Lovely stuff, scary stuff. And like I said, it's at the end of The Sopranos. It's at the end of Sopranos, actually. And it's just, I think AJ just reads it at one point. It's supposed to be a reference to his father, but it was a little ham-handed at that point. I wish they would have done it a little more subtly. But it's still a fantastic show, no question. I'm just going to read a chunk from Among School Children so you can get an idea, because this wasn't one that was on my radar when I was a kid. It's probably because the name of it didn't sound cool, but anyway. I walk through the long schoolroom questioning. A kind old nun in a white hood replies, "The children learn to cipher and to sing, to study reading books and history, to cut and sew, be neat in everything in the best modern way. The children's eyes in momentary wonder stare upon a 60-year-old smiling public man." Creepy. Anyway, so that sounds lovely. And there's probably some fantastic stuff in here. I'm going to read the rest of it at some point. I'm not going to read the whole thing out here, though. Maybe just the end, so you can get another idea. I don't want to spoil it. I read all of the Second Coming. Everybody's read the Second Coming. But anyway, so that's Yeats. Some lovely stuff in there. This was number 94, so we didn't scale the list here, but definitely some good quotable stuff. And next we'll be moving on to 93. I can't remember what 93 is. Number 93 is Robinson Crusoe. So I'm not super excited about that one, but, we'll talk about it. And then on to the next one, All right, so thank you. This has been your coffee.